Well, hello again, YouTube. It's Petey, and I wanted to do an update on the video I had just made, the BBE 2150. So it's a board, which is a circuit board that costs between $8 and $20. You can get different versions of it. One of the more expensive versions included the 3-band EQ, which was a separate circuit from the BBE. The original BBE, or Aphex is how I remember the company, Aphex Oral Exciter, was something that did phase correlation, time alignment with different frequencies. They did not sell it. They rented it to studios. It really made your mixes sound very bright. So there was a lot of people used that, and then when they started selling it, they gooped it, meaning they put some type of epoxy over all the circuitry so you couldn't take it apart and reverse engineer it. So there was a lot of debate in the community. The fans of the company and the effect claimed, yes, it's everything that they say it is, while detractors said it's just an EQ. It's just a smile curve EQ, which boosts the high frequencies and the low frequencies, which gives a loudness effect, which is pleasing to our ear. The thing with that type of stuff is you got to be careful because when you go overboard with it, it kind of has the effect of compression and limiting, where it removes the dynamic range of the performance and will lead to ear fatigue. Mind you, when applied where it needs to be, like in my case, I built a miniature PA system, 600 watts, uses 8-inch, portable. This isn't supposed to be something. We don't play for an audience. There's not hordes of people there. It's just me and my wife, and we just need something loud enough for the bass frequencies, for her electric bass. So, yeah, it's a 600 watt. That's what it's rated at. Runs off a 48 volt power supply, which is a lithium ion battery, and blah, 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 blah. Now, it's the mixer. We updated the mixer. We were using a really kind of a cheap one, which had more high end on it. Now, when we upgraded, we got a Behringer 1002B, which has a battery option on it, and I wasn't really happy with the sound. So I looked on eBay. They were selling this circuit, which claimed to be a chip, the BBE Sonic Maximizer or Aphex Oral Exciter. I think how it goes, man, I shouldn't be making videos and acting like I know when I don't. Maybe Aphex Oral Exciter was the original thing, and then BBE bought it. And they called it the BBE Sonic Maximizer. And then they came out with a pedal, a guitar pedal called the BBE Sonic Stop. So there's all kinds of different names for this and a bunch of controversy. And I already talked about all this, but when I initially had connected it inside our powered mixer, I ran the power line. It takes 9 to 18 volts. And I have two 12 volt lines inside of my project. So I ran it to one of the 12 volt lines, and it popped a fuse. Now, rather than try to figure out what was going on, I just ran it to another line. I ran it to the 8.5 volt line, which is the MP3. There's a built-in MP3 player because our band, we have drum tracks. We don't have a drummer. It's my wife and I. And rather than employ a drummer, I program my own drums, and that's how I like it. So, blah, 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 blah. There's a 9 volt, 8.5 volt line as a battery pack, and that goes right to the MP3 player through a switch. So I hooked it into that, and you know, it on the eBay auction, it says this device runs between 9 and 20 volts. 9 and 18 volts is what it says. Now, oftentimes those specs are incorrect, and I don't know why that is. Like on one of the diagrams on eBay, because I looked at a few, there's a bunch of these boards. Like this chip came out and a bunch of people made boards for it. So it's up to you on which one you buy. I bought the one that had the little jumpers instead of the switches. And again, I apologize if you've seen all this already. I made a video yesterday. One of the auctions mislabeled their bypass jumper as a bass boost. So it says bass boost on off switch. And then it says high frequency 6 or 9 dB boost. And then bass frequency 6 or 9 dB boost. So I highly doubt that there's a bass boost on and off and then another bass boost switch. Two are the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? The point is, I looked at the data sheet for the chip. There is no voltage regulator or buck circuit included on the PCB, the circuit board that I bought. So that tells me that when the manufacturer says it can run at 4.5 volts up to 30 volts, and I'm more inclined to believe that with the exception of what are the capacitors rated at. And that has to do with your ceiling, your higher pointed voltage rather than dropping it down lower than spec. So yeah, it's running at 8.5 volts rather than 9. Sue me. But the LED was bright, and we certainly couldn't tell when we did the sound test. It sounded good, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. It the track we tested, it has a little hi-hat thing going on.
Like
And in that part, with the, we were bypassing it and then engaging it. And you could really hear the air open up on it, the high frequency. With it off, the mid-range jumped out, and it sounded terrible. The RPA sounded terrible with it off. Because we started out with it on, and I'm like, man, oh yeah, this is excellent. And my wife's like, what is this thing doing again? And I bypassed it, and so yeah. I'm telling you, this is a great product. This is a great product. So if you're into DIY audio, you should look into getting one of these for yourselves. They're cheap. You can get them for the one with the EQ on it. That's the one I would recommend you get. Get that one. Put it in a box with RCA jacks or quarter-inch jacks or your input-output of preference. And the only thing about that board is it looked to me like the op-amp chips were counterfeit. So you could do yourself a little better by replacing those with the proper op-amp. Because the NE5532 is really quiet. It's a really quiet op-amp, but it uses more current. Okay? It's more of a hi-fi, like a really good one, as opposed to the normal TL072. And I know people will argue with me about that. And, shake your fist. You know what? It uses more fucking current. Okay, pal? Can you forgive me for looking at that spec and saying, that's my reality, is if it uses more current. And then you have the actual test, because that's how I figured out I had counterfeit NE5532. Well, the first hint was looking at it and the image of Texas Instruments. When it's a Texas Instruments chip, there's an image of Texas on it, real small, and inside of that there's a little circle and it says TI, Texas Instruments. And at Texas, it didn't. It looked like Butte, Montana. It didn't look like Texas. It looked like Long Island. Weird looking Texas. So I hooked up my meter. There's something you can do with your voltmeter, which is called a current consumption test. It's not the right name, but that's what it does. And looking at the ratings, when you go online and check out the data sheet from the manufacturers who made the chips, they tell you how much current it's supposed to draw. And so I made myself familiar with the levels of current of, like, what is a TL072 supposed to draw? What is an NE5532 supposed to draw? And it draws more. And that tells me that If it's drawing more current, that means that there's more headroom in the chip, that it's a better chip because it's sucking more power. So if you care about, for me, the main thing is like, well, am I going to be using this device where power consumption is an issue? Like, is it battery powered or is it plugged into the wall? Because if it's battery powered, maybe you're going to want to use the regular chip and sacrifice. Like, what are you building? Is it a hi-fi circuit or is it a dark box? Is it a distortion? Because if it's a distortion, my thinking tells me use the chip that's dirtier, that's nastier, that's funkier, that has less headroom and uses less power consumption. Now, is it a clone? Is it that type of dirt box where you might be using it as a clean boost? This is the stuff that is running through my head when I've had too much to drink, or I've just woken up, or I'm about to fall asleep. So that knowing all that and considering all that, I went with my meter and tested this device that I had purchased. And forgive me if you've heard this already. I bought this EQ board. It was a similar thing. It was like a $10 little 3-band EQ, and I put it in a box so I could have like a small battery power or run off a power supply anytime I needed an EQ, rather than grab a big giant heavy thing and plug it into an AC. I could do this EQ off a battery pack or off a wall wart. Small little box, does what I need to do. Because I like that. Like if I'm going to hook up a Walkman, an MP3 player, to a set of speakers, and there's a tone control on the Walkman, and I've got that set how I like, and there's a tone control on the speakers, I have that set like I like, it's going to be lacking until I insert an external EQ with a smile curve. Then I'm home. Then I'm good. And that's how I like it. That's how I've trained my ears. So this is a problem for me, and like I said, going through this process, I realized real quickly that EQ was giving me all kinds of problems. It was humming. That was the main thing. I played around doing some different grounding things and went through every power supply in the house and found one that was quieter than all the others. But it still had this little bit of hum that when the music stopped, you could hear it, and it drove me nuts. Drove me nuts to the point of I got rid of it. I ended up buying another one that was like, let's say this one was $8. I bought a $15 one, rebuilt the unit in the same chassis, and then the more expensive one was fine. But through this process, I familiarized myself with the current draw of different ICs, and I had those ICs, so I went ahead and started installing them. And I believe this particular EQ board had 2 integrated circuits in it. And what I learned was the stock chips that had the goofy looking pictures of Texas, the counterfeit NE5532, they drew less current than a TLO72. So I popped the TLO72 in there, a pair of them, and it was like twice the current draw. I didn't notice any fidelity increase. But then I popped the NE5032 in there, the real ones. I've got real NE5532s here that I bought from Tata, of all places. And I know people will say, oh, Tata sells all counterfeit. My experience has been that Tata's pretty good, but they don't have the best customer service. And when you get wrong stuff from them, good luck getting your money back. That's the downside of Tata. But the main takeaway of this was the current draw was right in spec with what Texas Instruments said it would be when I put the non-counterfeit chips in there, and it did sound. It had clearer sounding audio, just a little bit clearer. And I never had. I was never able to remove the hum from that unit. So I got rid of it, like I said. And the new one that I ordered, I believe the chips in the new one were counterfeit too. So I replaced those with the proper NE5532, and the EQ now works, and it's free of hum. But yeah, that's the op amp talk. And why I'm bringing it up is if you watch this video and the idea of it, the sonic maximizer of that chip sounds good to you, I would really recommend getting the board that has the additional EQ, unless you don't have room, unless you want to just install this thing as a internal unit that doesn't have any knobs or switching on it, which sometimes that's really like that's what I did, you know. But you could also build a preamp for yourself, for lack of a better word, uh, if you got the one with the EQ, and then you add a 3-band EQ to your project. And I like the idea of having the 6 or 9 defeatable switching, as well as the bypass. You could, who knows? This may eventually turn into a thing where I end up getting one and building it into a chassis for myself, because I could do it for under $20, and it was like taking the blanket off, taking a wet blanket off of the PA. That's what the effect of it was. So, thank you for joining me. In the process, when I cracked this thing open, I noticed that the screws that I had used to mount the battery, there's battery sleds, there's a bunch of them. I think it takes 15 batteries, but don't quote me. It's between 12 and 18 batteries. So wherever I would use a screw, like I was frugal with the screws, like it's a three banger, would hold 3 18650s, and I would use like 2, one on each corner. And then those batteries in those corners would sit, they wouldn't go all the way in because that screw was sticking up. So I found some 2.2 millimeter really small screws where the head on them was almost about the same size as the mounting hole, but maybe just a little bigger. So yeah, I replaced some of those. I ran out of those tiny screws. I found them for $1.45 for a pack of 50 and ordered 3 packs of those. So when those come in, I'm going to go ahead and replace those. So yeah, that's what we did today. I've got the aviation connectors came in, and I have to make some cables. When I was working on this project, I realized that this 48 volt high current, using a typical outer 5.5 millimeter diameter, inner 2.1 millimeter diameter DC connector, those are rated for 12 volt, 3 amp or 5 amp. I'm sure there wouldn't be a problem running 48 volts 10 amp through it. I'm sure there wouldn't. Okay, but I wanted to have connectors that were rated for the job. So I ordered one of these, and at the time I remember paying like $7-8 for this thing. I ended up finding 2 for like $5.50. I tried to order these from Tata. I measured the. I took my digital caliper and measured this right in here, the connector, and it came out 12 millimeter. So I ordered like 4 of their 12 mil. They were 50 cents at Tata. These are cheap. I ordered 4 of those, and they sent them, and they stock 12 millimeter and 16 millimeter. So I measured and ordered the 12 millimeter. However it went, it was like they emailed me back, and they're like, because I said you sent me the wrong connector, and they were like, no, we contacted the manufacturer. You don't go by that measurement. You don't measure that. So it turns out the 16 millimeter connector. How did it work? It was so unbelievably confusing.
It's measuring the black
the
part.
outer
maybe?
diameter.
Not the outer diameter, but like the inner outer diameter. Not. I don't remember. It's measuring something smaller than 16. It's measuring 12, right?
Yeah, whatever it was like if you measure this here and order that same size connector, you'll get the wrong one. Which I can't imagine how that. Where's my. Thank you, honey. Yeah, let's measure this. Okay, this is coming up 14. 15, 15.2. So I would think this would be the 16. But it's a 22 or something. It's whatever it was. I ordered the biggest ones Tata sold, and they came and they were ridiculously small. They were tiny. They wouldn't even house the wire. The gauge of wire that I used wouldn't have fit in there. Maybe one wire would. So yeah, these came into. Be careful ordering aviator connectors. Be careful. You need to really look at the data sheet and at the measurements on it. Make sure you're getting the right one. But this is what I went with, and yeah, they're really big, which the gauge of wire that we use to anything over 12 volts is automotive wire that I've got. That's really unbelievably heavy duty, really thick gauge wire. I do not want to have any type of melting or smoke or any of that bullshit. So I went way over spec on the gauge wire, which is that's just the way that I roll. You know, I don't have the math skills to figure out the proper gauge, so I go way more than what I need, and I use short runs, and I will fuse it as close to the battery as I can, and those are words to live by. But yeah, I've got to make. Right now, we have one battery, the e-bike battery, and if something were to go wrong with that, I could very easily use a pair of 12 volt batteries to get 24 to power this thing, even though it runs up to 48 or 50 volts. But I would have no way to hook that up. Like, let's say I hook up 3 batteries. That's 36 volts. That would be, I mean, ideally, this PA we could run it off 24 and it wouldn't matter because I'm not even opening it up that much. We're not cranking the PA. It's very running it very cool, so I don't need a cooling fan. So the point of this discussion is, I ordered these because we need to make some connectors to connect with spade terminals so I can run them on sealed lead acid batteries. And then I lost my shorty speaker cable. So yeah, I got some cable making to do. I've been really thinking about my center channel amp. I built this blue amp last year. I built the black amp this year. And I have this tiny amp, which is a 100 watt mono TPA 316D2 100 watt Class D with a tone mender EQ on the front end. And I want to try some different things. I've got this DD7. I'm going to build the Benson preamp. So I was thinking, well, if I build that into a pedal, and I had the Benson and then the DD7, which is a digital modeling pedal, it sucks power, but I could always disconnect it when I'm running clean, just run clean, and then when I'm running dirty, connect this thing, and it has a MT2 setting on it, which is it's a Boss Metal Zone, and I know people love to hate on that pedal, but the reality of it would be this would be going right into a power amp. It's not going into a guitar amp. It's going into there's an EQ on the front which I can set flat. I know how to set the tone mender to get pretty flat. And I've used that MT2. Oh, it's the DD7. I've used it before, and it's got a couple of good tones in it. So that would be one option, and a really small, because that's the thing. I'd like to reduce a little bit if I can. We've got another amp which I never used, that I built, which is it's a Rockman. A Tom Scholz Rockman is the front end, and it's bolted to this amp that I made, which says Volvo on it, and it's got a 3-band hi-fi EQ and another one of those 100-watt amp boards with the batteries internal, and it's got some LED strip that jumps up and down. Stupid thing. So yeah, as we go out, like I said, I redid a bunch of patches for my wife's multi-effector. She's going to try this Klon. I'm going to have some different center channel stuff. I'm still kind of, figuring out that center channel, and having a bunch of options and having different gear every time I go out. I like it. It gives me some, like, there's a wild card in there, which I really don't know. What is it going to sound like? And I know that blue amp, I use that blue amp, man. The black one is good, but I think that blue amp might be the one. And this Volvo amp, I never used this with that Rockman, and that's the Def Leppard Hysteria album. That's what they used on it. So it's not, whether you like Def Leppard or you hate them, I always thought that album was incredible. Like, when it came out, putting my head up by the boombox listening to it, like, wow, they've reached a new plateau in rock music. This recording, it was Mutt Lange, I believe, and all they used was those Rockman. So anyway, wish me luck, you guys. Sorry for the incessant yammering on this one, but take care of yourselves. Good luck, David. So sorry to hear your amp that happened, but best of luck on that one, and keep me in the loop. All right, you guys, stay cool, hug your pets, and peace.